Hi, I'm Melissa Berberich, and this is my presentation on teaching strategies for writing and spelling. Writing flows throughout the entire curriculum of any educational system. Spelling, no matter what language, is a necessity for properly communicating in written form. Why learn to spell? Spelling is the root of writing and reading. Having a good grasp on spelling will help make a student more fluent reader. Struggling in spelling correlates to significant spelling and reading difficulties that become lifelong problems. Our brains try to fish the meaning out of a jumble of letters before we can actually read them. An example of this is reading a word that is misspelled, but your brain reads it correctly. Writing, while being a poor speller, on the other hand, is a recipe for disaster. Rules. I before E except after C and other such rules can be helpful, but they just aren't foolproof in the English language. Because our words are derived from dozens of ancient languages, a rule that applies in one situation may not apply in another. Letters. We have 26 letters in the English alphabet and 44 phonemes. That alone is enough reason to commit to the practice of spelling. It doesn't include blends, slides, diphthongs, or any of the other combinations of sounds that we can create with those 26 letters. Meaning. Greek and Latin root words form the foundation of most of the words we use every day. Something like build leads us to building, builder, and rebuild. Choosing the right word. What's the difference between effect and affect? One letter and an entire definition. Spelling can change the meaning of a word with only a single letter. This also loops back to the Latin and Greek roots of many of our words. The writing process. The writing process consists of 5 steps: planning, composing, revising, editing, and publishing. In the planning step, writers choose a topic. According to our text, Graham Harris and their colleagues have successfully taught students with learning disabilities and behavioral disorders to use self-regulated strategy development when writing. On the right, I have an example of the technique that Graham and Harris use, and I will dig a little deeper into the tree method later in the presentation. During the compose step, students begin to organize ideas and flesh out those ideas. Revising gives writers a chance to look back over their text to see if there is more to add or perhaps even something that would be better left out. This is an opportunity to clarify meanings, choose more accurate words, add detail, and check for accuracy. Editing is the step in which writers will proofread for grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Finally, the goal of all writers is publishing. Publishing doesn't have to be a book or a magazine. Publishing is presenting a finished piece of work to its intended audience. This may be only a teacher, or it might be the class reading circle. Regardless, the goal is to get the piece of writing ready for this destination. Special considerations. Considerations for spelling instruction. For students working under RTI levels or with IEPs for learning disabilities, there are a number of considerations for spelling instruction. Students at Tier 1 are generally capable of following traditional instruction and adapting to the list practice test pattern in most classrooms. This includes approximately 80% of the students in a typical school. The students at Tier 2 comprise 15 to 16% of students in a typical school. These students may find the introduction of 10 to 15 new words in one day to be overwhelming. This feeling transfers into frustration, refusal to practice, and even failure in the traditional classroom. Small sets and creative practice will lead most of these students to success. We'll explore other methods in Part 3 of this presentation. Students at Tier 3 require the most intensive and explicit spelling practice. Selecting appropriate words, working with spelling patterns, small lists, and creative practice methods will help these students to be successful. Only 5 to 6% of students in a typical school fall into Tier 3 intervention. Considerations for writing instruction. Response to intervention is in place in most schools, and it has been incorporated into the special education structure of most of them. Writing instruction is a very different type of instruction in that it touches every subject. We've all heard of writing across the curriculum. Because of the overarching impact of writing in education, A student who struggles in writing struggles in everything. Students at Tier 1, typically 80%, are generally capable of following traditional instruction and adopting the 5 steps of the writing process. This process reaches into every type of writing, even a short answer or a single sentence. A student must decide what to write it, read over it, fix it if necessary, and turn it over to someone. Students at Tier 2, again 15 to 16% of students in the typical school, face challenges in writing instruction. The author of our text says they are less aware of steps in the writing process. For example, think an idea, decide what the purpose will be, organize the key parts sequentially, and of ideas and procedures for organizing their written text. Students with learning disabilities are also more dependent on external cues, such as how much to write, teacher feedback, and mechanical presentation of the paper. Students at Tier 3 are generally those who are unable to understand or implement the writing process with or without assistance. Challenges may extend to the actual mechanics of putting words and thoughts on paper, requiring these students to need assistive technology or intense instruction and practice in handwriting and typing to help with transcribing ideas. Remember, only 5 to 6% of students in a typical school fall into Tier 3 intervention, but according to rtinetwork.org, 80 to 90% of special education students are in that Tier 3 level. Teaching strategies. I've embedded a video to help illustrate the strategies. Prezi can just do some things that other platforms can't. So we're going to jump right into the teaching strategies here. Now we went a little overboard with collecting them, but we don't have time to explore all of them. I'll make sure to list them in the outline, and you'll also have access to the Prezi outside of the full presentation. Spelling. I talked about how important recall and spelling are to every aspect of education, and I'm going to introduce 2 methods of teaching spelling that I believe are particularly effective. One is the dictation method, the other is differentiated spelling practice. First, we'll look at the dictation or Orton-Gillingham method. Chantal Barrett writes, "Poor spelling is often a sign of dyslexia. Spelling and reading are intimately linked. To spell correctly, a child relies on his stored representations of a word, and these are imperfect in dyslexia. Spelling difficulties may be an indication that the child is not paying attention to all the letters in a word and not storing that word correctly." Chantal Barrett is a teacher trainer with a company called Reading Horizons. They're a reading intervention company whose philosophy is based on the work of educator Charlotte Lockhart. Using her research and that of Virginia Beringer, plus an expansion of the Orton-Gillingham method, Reading Horizons developed the dictation method, which even without the rest of the Reading Horizons program can lead to monumental changes in spelling and recall for students in Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention. So this technique has a few steps. The first step is the teacher says the word twice, camp, camp. The students repeat the word twice, camp, camp. Students will write the word on a whiteboard, mark the word if desired. This part is not required. It doesn't make a huge difference for all learners, but it can help those who are struggling in spelling and reading fluency. You can see here that I've got a graphic on how marking the word works. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we don't have time, but I do recommend that you look through this on your own when you have a few minutes. I think that you'll find it beneficial and it will help to make sense out of a lot of this. Step 4 of the dictation method is that students will hold up the whiteboard where they have written their word. The point of this is for immediate feedback. The teacher can see whether or not the student has written the word correctly and can immediately give that student feedback that will help them to learn those spelling patterns more effectively. I've also included here a video example of a breakout session led by Chantal Barrett in a teacher education seminar. We're not going to go through the example because the video alone is about 11 minutes, but I do recommend that you take a minute and watch this on your own. Moving on to differentiated spelling practice. Charles Bose writes, empowers students. Many students with learning difficulties feel discouraged and unable to influence their learning. They turn the responsibility for learning over to the teacher and become passive learners. How can we empower students? Choice. Students need to feel that they are actively involved in their learning. There are several options available to offer a student choice in spelling. Effective spelling centers, you see them in many, many classrooms. They provide ample choices. Ideally, students will choose a different practice method each day of the week with an expectation to complete one method each day. So they're not going to be spending all of their time doing an artwork type spelling practice or all of their time writing a story. They're going to work on artwork one day. They're going to work on something that requires them to read and learn about the words the next day. Always make sure that you have some method of accountability for center work, especially in these types of spelling exercises, because it's real easy for a student to say, oh yeah, I did shaving cream, when what they actually did was sat and drew pictures in the shaving cream. It's important to use that accountability. It helps teach students responsibility and helps them to see the outcome of their practice. We're going to look at 3 different activities to have in your spelling center. We're only going to go really into detail on 2 of those sections. The 3 sections are puzzles, kinesthetic practice, and word work. In the puzzles category, one that stood out to me in our text was designed by Johnson and Michelbest. They suggest working from recognition to partial recall to total recall when teaching new spelling words. This activity involves the teacher creating a new sheet each week for students to practice on. It's especially helpful for students with dyslexia who have difficulty recalling a visual of what the word looks like. And this method helps them to commit the letter order to memory. So they're not just remembering how to spell it, they're remembering what it looks like. It helps them to create an image in their mind. So as you can see here, we're going to start out with the whole word, with, W-I-T-H. The next line will be W with a blank, T-H. The child will fill in the I. The next line, W-I-T, blank. The child will fill in H. The next line, blank, I-T-H. Next, W-I, blank, blank. Next, W, blank, blank, blank. And finally, all blanks where the child writes the word for us. This allows the student to practice recalling where these letters go in this word. So they're just writing one letter at a time, but in the process, they're memorizing, where does that I go? Oh yeah, it goes between the W and the TH. Other puzzles that could be used in this area could also include things like letter blocks that the students rearrange to make their spelling words. You could use magnet or felt letters to spell out words as well. Kinesthetic practice. This is the other method that we're going to really go into some detail on. Many students with learning disabilities are lacking something in the orthographic loop of sensory input, sensory output, sensory input, as defined by Virginia Beringer. Allowing for kinesthetic practice can help to meet that need for sensory output. These activities are best done in pairs to accommodate the sensory input of hearing it. And when I talk about the orthographic loop, sensory input, sensory output, sensory input, this means they're going to sensory input, hear it, sensory output, write it in some method, and sensory input, they're going to read it. This loop picks up where the phonological loop leaves off. So that's the one that we're using in the dictation method of see it, say it, hear it. In this one, we're moving into the rest of that loop. Whether these things are done in this specific order or not does not seem to matter, as in the instance of the dictation method. But what is important is that all the steps happen with or while practicing. Students with dyslexia often have a disconnect in the phonological loop. Students with dysgraphia often have a deficit in the orthographic loop. Since both of these loops contribute to the strength of working memory, practicing them will certainly help with learning and remembering these spelling skills long term. So the first exercise that we're going to look at here is shaving cream spelling. the teacher will provide a can of shaving cream. Barbasol is my favorite. It's available at the dollar store. What the student will do is spread a small amount of shaving cream. I usually tell the kids no more than 2/4. So they'll have 2 spots of 2/4 or the quarter size on the table. They'll spread it out and they can practice writing their words in the shaving cream. I like to do this as a partner exercise where one student reads the word out loud, the next student writes the word, and then reads it to check it. So then they're getting that hear it, write it, read it. Partner switch roles after 5 words. That way they both get a chance to play in the shaving cream. Nobody gets bored. Everybody gets a chance to practice. Sandbox spelling. You can do this by a couple of different methods. You can use a deep picture frame. Again, dollar store, Goodwill, anywhere like that. Get a deep picture frame, put a little bit of art sand or even playground sand in it, and or a small sandbox like a cigar box or something like that. Students write the word with an unsharpened pencil after a friend says the word. Same deal, the student reads the word or writes the word, then reads the word to check it. Another method, and this is one that I used a lot in my class last year, was stamping or stenciling. You can either use letter stamps, which I bought at Hobby Lobby, I think for $2 for a set of letter stamps, and there's lots of different fonts, so that makes it kind of fun. So letter stamps and an ink pad, or stencils, which again, you can get really cheap at the dollar store or anywhere else, and colored pencils. One student will say the word, the other student will write the word out, either with their stamps or their stencil. Then they check it, and again, they'll switch back and forth. Moving on to word work. Word work allows students to put meaning to their words. And when a student is learning to read, learning to spell, learning to write effectively, they need to know what their words mean. Activities can include dictionary work, learning to use a dictionary, learning to find a word in the dictionary. One of the things I used to hate is when you'd ask a teacher how to spell something and they would tell you, look it up. I don't know how to spell it. I can't look it up. Yeah, joke's on me. That's exactly how I learned to spell it. So dictionary work, writing sentences where you have to use each word in a sentence, writing a story where every spelling word has to be in this story. Those usually get really interesting. Or even illustration of spelling words. That can be an interesting one for students that need that little bit of creative outlet. You know, when somebody's having a really rotten day and they really just want to draw, awesome, go illustrate your spelling words for me. It's a great way for them to be able to still practice their spelling words while being able to do something that makes them feel a little bit better. Writing strategies. Students with learning disabilities may have great difficulty grasping the 5 steps of the writing process. We'll use the tree method as described in our textbook to illustrate a simplified process. The tree method was developed by Stephen Graham and Karen Harris as part of a self-regulating method of writing instruction specifically for students with learning disabilities and behavioral disorders. So an explanation of this structure that was used by Graham and Harris. This is an explanation of the method used by Graham and Harris. Think, who will read this? Why am I writing it? Who is my audience here? Plan, what do I want to say or talk about? This is where we go into the tree method for limiting and filling out a topic. Plan what to say using the tree method. This is where we're going to decide what we want to talk about. For the topic, what will I talk about? This can be a topic sentence or just a topic. Reasons. What is important about this topic? E, for examine or elaborate. Why are my details important? And end. Bring it together and connect ideas. And then we go to write and say more. When using the tree method, students can repeat the process with each paragraph or chapter to flesh out their writing ideas or project. I created a graphic organizer for use with elementary students. Feel free to keep and use it if you like. So this is just a bunch of brain breaks that I have collected over my time working with kids. And I find that students need breaks to keep their brains engaged. For students with learning disabilities and behavioral disorders, this is especially important. I've included a few of my brain break ideas that keep the learning going. For the sake of time, I'll leave this for you to explore. Thanks for watching.